Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So let's talk about mental health. This is something that has been in the news in a lot in the last couple of years. You've been hearing more and more about mental health. And it is something that has also been discussed not just in broad terms, but as it relates to the black community, right? You specifically, there's been so much target about mental health as it relates to the black community. Before this, I would say, latest emergence or latest push for this real emphasis on mental health, it used to be something primarily associated with the military, especially for people coming back from, fighting and all that sort of stuff. And so that's where a lot of the focus of mental health used to be a lot of times. It's broadened now, right? I would say that it's definitely broadened in terms of how it's covered in the media. It's not just a veteran's way of looking at it in terms, well, the person's perhaps a vet or whatever the case is. Now the whole idea of mental health is completely broadened. So that's what I want to talk about today. Two things I want to discuss, and it's my experience having to deal with mental health in my family, and also just a general stigma of mental health. And then there will be subsequent discussions where I'll talk about the various types of mental health, how you can deal with it, and how someone can end up suffering from mental health. Those will all follow. But I just want to talk about my experience with mental health and then discuss, just the general stigmas of it. And I might do them together as I'm going through, but I'll try to separate at least so that you'll be able to follow me. So let me talk a little bit about my experience with it. Wow, it's been all of my adult life, right? So it's been all of my adult life, and it has been, as far as I could remember, almost all of my life that I've been dealing with this whole idea of mental health. So, I've been dealing with it for over 30 years, right? So, for sure, I've been dealing with the whole idea of, and not just the idea, but I should say the reality of mental health. So, in my family, my one of my uncles has struggled severely with mental health issues, really from since he was probably, I would say, having to be in maybe around his 20s, right? Early 20s. He's been struggling with mental health. And look, oh, excuse me. It has been a tough, let me find my voice. It's been a tough situation for the our family to have to deal with that. Um, he has been at times extremely violent, not so much so now, but in the past, violence for whatever reason, he became really violent, and that seemed to be the way to deal with stuff. I mean, he would throw rocks at our house when he was off of his meds and all that type of stuff. And we grew up terrified at my uncle when he was in that type of state. And for my grandmother, who has now passed away, and may she rest in peace, she had to deal with him on a constant basis. And we the it was it was challenging at a younger age, because you're trying to figure out, all we heard was crazy. And I think that's one of the things with mental health, right? People say you're crazy, like you're really crazy. If you look at movies and look at the person a lot of times who's the villain in a movie, and it will be that that person has some kind of mental disorder. So they always cast, a lot of times, not always, but most times, let's just be honest, They will cast the villain in a movie. Look at the media, look at Hollywood, as the person who has some kind of mental thing going on, right? Some kind of mental disorder. And that person will be the person who's the villain. So I grew up, going back to growing up, I grew up with my uncle at times being so violent. And so I always heard crazy, crazy. And so when I was younger, it affected all of us, to be quite honest with you. Even whether it was my mom or older uncle or my aunt, that type of stuff, that affected, and then just the family in general, because it was always, that's your crazy uncle, right? I mean, that's literally how a lot of people would would address me or talk to me or stuff like that in the neighborhood. Well, that's your crazy uncle. And it was said in that way, not just because he was struggling with mental illness. And so now I see it as mental illness. I'll be honest with you as well, right? I just saw it as crazy because that is what I was told at that age. I didn't know better. And when everybody is telling you something is this, and you have not been exposed to anything different and to a different way of looking at things, then the tendency a lot of times is for you to also see it that way. So straight up, I would just, in my mind, for me, my uncle is and was crazy, and that's just kind of how I looked at it. I never realized the power of words at that stage. I didn't realize the power of words. Sorry, at that stage in my life, to realize that if you change the way you talk about something, you could significantly have an impact on that something. Even the way you tell yourself certain types of things, if you change the way that you talk about a certain thing, then you yourself could have an impact on that certain thing. And so I didn't realize that the way that the family talked about it then could have had, and had we known better, and I knew what I know now, right, that we might have been able to have a better impact. But it was also a society thing, right? Let's think about this. It was a society thing. So that is what I grew up in a culture. And if you think about whether it's in where I grew up, which is in Trinidad and Tobago, or where I live now, which is in the United States of America, uh, regardless of where you are, that has been the stigma, right? And is that this person is crazy. It's crazy. They're crazy. They're crazy. And so a lot of times when we use terms like that, right? When we use terms like that, what we do is we've completely flattened somebody's experience. And so we're essentially saying that this person cannot be anything other than crazy, right? That's how we see him. So as I said, my uncle was crazy, and people use it as a way to demean my family and I, right? So it was used as a way to belittle us, to demean us, to make us feel somewhat less than whole because we had an uncle who was struggling with mental illness. And it worked because there was a sense of embarrassment that I would feel if I was walking and somebody say, "Hey, there goes your crazy uncle," or whatever the case is, or that type of stuff. And so it worked in just in the conversations that we had with ourselves at home, when no one else was there, and how we would talk about. Yes, my aunt would say, she feels so bad. She feels so ashamed, so embarrassed, because of the way he would say stuff. My mother felt the same way. I felt the same way as I got older and grew into my teenage years, before I moved to the U.S. and all that type of stuff. So there was this sense of shame and embarrassment. Looking back, I realized that I should not have been ashamed or embarrassed. All right, that when that is going on in your life, you feel like when you've got someone struggling in your life with mental illness, depending on the degree of the mental illness the person is struggling with. Because I'm telling you, he has spent almost all of his adult life, just having just having a mental disorder. And so when you have been around a situation like that where you know you are just experiencing that over and over and over and over again, after a while you tend to believe that this is your only reality, that there's nobody else in the world who's probably experiencing this until you grow up, you get older, you move around, you travel, you whatever the case is, and you realize that mental illness is a serious thing. And it's also something that a lot of times I feel like in the black community we don't quite handle. We turn it into a joke a lot of times. That's how I've honestly seen, whether it is in the United States of America or it is in Trinidad and Tobago or is it any black community. I've always seen that is that we have handled mental illness as a joke, right? We have generally handled it as a joke. It's something to laugh at. That's your crazy uncle. And some people would say, well, it's in jest. They're just making fun or whatever the case is. But a lot of times we don't realize the damage we're doing when all we do is just refer to people as just being this one thing. And look, there's a difference in saying somebody's crazy versus saying that they have a mental disorder. The power of the word, right? You think of the power of the word crazy. You think of the power of the word poor. You think of the power of the word mad, completely mad or insane. You think of the power of those words versus if you say that someone has a mental disorder and they can be treated for it, right? Because when you say crazy and mad and all this type of stuff, it sounds like it's a lost cause. Like there's nothing that you could absolutely do for them. So I had a horrid experience with it that I'll talk about more as I get into more discussions about mental illness and how it made me feel so embarrassed and my family so embarrassed. But that's the stigma with mental illness, that you're crazy, that the person's crazy, they're insane, they're this, they're that, there's no hope for them. And as I've said, I've seen it in the black community, whether it's here in the US or it's back home in Trinidad and Tobago or it's wherever. Black folks have always treated it as a joke, for the most part, from what I've seen. I'm not saying all black people have, but certainly a lot of black folks have. Just the crazy uncle joke or the crazy this or whatever the case is, and that has power, right? The words have power, and the way we talk about things and the way we address things. So now that I consider myself to be wiser, not just older but wiser. I would say that, yeah, there's no reason for me to feel ashamed. As a matter of fact, I don't. I regret even some of the things that I thought and probably would have said back then. But as you grow up, you realize certain things and you get over certain things and you get wiser to certain things. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit today. Mental illness, it's no joke. If you have someone struggling with mental illness, you've got to be able to reach out to them and help them. Be careful about how you talk about it. That's the thing. Right? Don't reduce somebody to just being mad and crazy and making them feel like there's no hope for them, because then it's going to be difficult for you to be able to help somebody, right? If they're struggling, and the way you talk about their struggles doesn't seem like you're trying to help them get better, right? You're not going to be able to help that person. So, as I said, there are going to be several parts to this topic surrounding mental illness. This is just the beginning. Please leave in the comments for any of you who've had personal struggles with mental illness, family members, or whatever the case is. So if you yourself have had to deal with it, you can leave that in the comments, and I'll be sure to kind of get back to you as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Please turn on your post notifications, because I post almost every single day, at least 5 or 6 times a week. I post. And then please don't forget to share and hit the like button, because those two things help the channel grow. So I'm looking forward to your comments about mental disorders and stuff like that, and we'll talk about that as we go. Don't forget to also go back and look at my other videos. Until next time, peace.